"We've been preparing for this for years," my son said, as if he were talking about a weekend trip instead of my life. The fork slipped from my hand and hit the plate with a sharp, clean sound that seemed louder than it should have been in my own dining room. I remember noticing the smallest things in that moment. The way the kitchen clock above the refrigerator ticked just a little too loudly. The steam rising from the pot roast I'd spent 3 hours cooking. The way Claire kept her hands folded neatly in her lap like she'd already rehearsed this conversation. It was Sunday, the kind of quiet Ohio evening I used to look forward to. I had set the table the same way I always did, with the blue-rimmed china my late husband, Thomas, insisted we save for family dinners. Cloth napkins, real silverware, a small vase with grocery store carnations in the center. I believed in keeping traditions alive, even after he passed. Especially after he passed. Daniel sat across from me, shoulders slightly forward, elbows near the table, but not touching it. He wouldn't quite meet my eyes. Claire, beside him, sat perfectly straight, her expression composed, almost gentle if you didn't look too closely. "Mom," Daniel added, quieter now, like he was trying to soften something that had already landed too hard. "You have to understand, we didn't just decide this overnight." I picked up my glass of iced tea, more for something to do with my hands than because I wanted a drink. The condensation had already formed a ring on the table. I placed it carefully on a coaster. "Small control," I told myself. "Keep your hands steady. Then help me understand," I said. My voice came out even, which surprised me. "What exactly have you been planning?" Claire finally leaned forward, just slightly, her tone measured, almost professional. "Margaret, we've been worried about you for a long time. The house is too much. The upkeep, the stairs, the isolation, it's not safe." There it was, framed like concern, wrapped neatly like one of those brochures she had left on my kitchen counter 2 weeks ago. I hadn't forgotten that. I hadn't forgotten the way she'd slid it toward me with her manicured fingers and said, "Just something to think about." I turned my attention back to Daniel. "You've been worried," I repeated. "4 years." He nodded once, quick, like checking a box. "We've talked about a lot. We just needed the right time." The right time. I let that settle between us. Outside, a car passed slowly down Maplewood Drive, headlights sweeping briefly across the front window before disappearing. Everything else felt still. Too still. I pushed my plate slightly away, appetite gone, though I hadn't taken more than 2 bites. "And tonight," I said, "this is the right time?" Claire exchanged a glance with Daniel, subtle but unmistakable, a silent agreement passing between them. She reached in her leather tote bag, the one she carried everywhere, and pulled out a thin folder. That was the moment something inside me shifted. Not panic, not even anger, just a quiet, steady awareness that this conversation had been structured long before I sat down at this table. She placed the folder gently on the table, aligning it with the edge like she was setting a place setting. "We've looked into some options," she said. "Communities that would be a better fit. There's one about 20 minutes from here. Beautiful grounds, medical staff on site, social activities." I raised a hand, not sharply, but enough to stop her. "Claire," I said, holding her gaze now, "before we talk about where you think I should live, I want to understand something." I leaned back slightly in my chair, folding my hands together the way Thomas used to when he was about to ask a question that mattered. "When you say you've been planning this for years, what exactly does this include?" Daniel shifted in his seat. For the first time that evening, he looked directly at me. There was something there, something uneasy, something he hadn't quite prepared for. And in that brief hesitation, I realized there was more to this than a conversation about moving. Much more. And whatever they weren't saying yet, that was the part one needed to hear next. Claire did not pull the folder back when I stopped her. Instead, she opened it slowly, like she had done it many times before, and turned it toward me. "We are not trying to take anything away from you," she said, her voice calm, practiced. "We're trying to make sure everything is handled properly before something goes wrong." I did not reach for the papers right away. I looked at Daniel instead. "Handled properly," I repeated. "Is that what you call this?" He exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck the way he used to when he was a teenager caught in a lie. "Mom, please, just look at it." I finally leaned forward and slid the top document closer. It was not a brochure this time. It was a form. Official. Typed. My name at the top. Margaret and Whitmore. Beneath it, a title I had never seen attached to my life before. Preliminary authorization for assisted financial oversight. I read that line twice, slower the second time. The words did not change. What is this? I asked. Claire answered before Daniel could. It is just a precaution. It allows Daniel to help manage certain aspects of your finances if needed. Bills, property taxes, insurance. Things that can get overwhelming. I let out a small breath, almost a laugh, but there was no humor in it. My property taxes are paid through October, I said. My insurance is on automatic renewal, and my bills are organized in that cabinet right there. I gestured toward the kitchen, where every statement was filed by month in labeled folders. Claire's smile did not disappear, but it tightened slightly. Of course, she said, and you have done an excellent job. But situations change. I turned another page. There was a section already filled out. Not signed, but completed. Estimated monthly expenses. Asset summary. Even a note about declining capacity risk. That was the phrase that made my fingers pause on the paper. I tapped it once with my index finger. Who wrote this? Daniel shifted again. It is just standard language, Mom. It does not mean anything yet. Yet, I echoed. I looked up at him fully now. So you've already talked to someone about this. He hesitated. That hesitation was longer this time. Claire stepped in, smooth as ever. We consulted with a financial advisor, just to understand the options. It would have been irresponsible not to. I sat back in my chair, the wood creaking softly beneath me. A financial advisor. Papers drafted. Language prepared. Years, he had said. Not weeks. Not months. Years. I reached for the bottom of the stack and found something else. A printed email thread. Dates in the corner. I scanned the first line. It was from nearly 11 months ago. Subject line, long-term planning for M. Whitmore. I felt something settle into place inside me. Not panic. Not even anger yet. Just clarity, like a puzzle piece finally locking where it had always belonged. I placed the papers neatly back into the folder and slid it a few inches toward Claire. You said you were worried about me, I said, my tone even. But this does not look like worry. This looks like preparation. Daniel leaned forward, his voice lower now. We are trying to prevent a crisis before it happens. I held his gaze. Or create one that justifies all of this. The words hung there, quiet but sharp. Claire's fingers tightened slightly on the edge of the folder. For the first time, her composure flickered. Just a fraction. Margaret, she said carefully, you are reading too much into this. I shook my head once slow. No, I said, I think I'm finally reading it correctly. I stood up from the table, picking up my glass and carrying it to the sink. The cold water ran for a moment longer than necessary as I set it down. Behind me, I could feel them watching, waiting for me to react the way they expected. But I was not going to give them that. Not yet. I turned back toward them, drying my hands on a dish towel. Tell me something, I said. When you spoke to this advisor, what exactly did you tell them about me? Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it again. Claire answered instead, her voice steady, but quieter now. We told them the truth. I met her eyes. Then you will not mind if I hear that truth directly from them. And the way Daniel's face changed in that moment told me there was something in those conversations they had never intended for me to hear. Daniel did not answer my question right away, and that silence told me more than anything he could have said. Claire shifted in her chair, crossing one leg over the other, her heel tapping once against the hardwood floor before she stilled it. It is just a standard consultation, she said, her tone smoothing itself again. You are making this sound more dramatic than it is. I walked back to the table, slower this time, and rested my hand lightly on the back of my chair without sitting down. Then it should be simple, I replied. You. Give me the name. I make a call, and we cleared up. Daniel finally spoke, but his voice had changed. Less confident. Mom, it is not necessary to go that far. I held his gaze. You already went that far. That landed. He looked down at the table, at the same plate of food he had barely touched. For a moment, I saw something familiar in him. Not the man sitting across from me now, but the boy who used to sit at this same table, swinging his legs because they did not reach the floor yet, asking me if he could have dessert before finishing his vegetables. I used to tell him, "You can, but you need to tell me the truth first." That had been our rule. Truth before comfort. I pulled out my chair and sat down again, folding my hands in front of me. "Do you remember," I said, quieter now, "when you were about 8 years old and you broke the window in the garage?" Daniel looked up, caught off guard. Claire frowned slightly, like she was not sure where this was going. "Mom, what does that have to do with anything?" "You told me it was the wind," I continued, not answering him directly. "You stood right there in that doorway, and you said the wind knocked a baseball through the glass." I gestured toward the kitchen door behind him, and I knew it was not true, but I gave you a chance to tell me again. Daniel let out a breath, almost a small laugh, but there was no humor in it. "I was a kid." "Yes," I said, "and eventually you told me the truth. You said you were scared I would be mad, and I told you something then that I meant." I leaned forward slightly. "I told you I could handle the truth a lot better than I could handle being lied to." The room went quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet now. Not just tension, recognition. Claire glanced at Daniel, then back at me. "No one is lying to you," she said, more firmly this time. I turned to her. "Then say the name." She held my gaze, but she did not speak. That was the answer. I let the silence stretch just long enough to make it uncomfortable. Then I reached for the folder again. This time, I did not stop at the first few pages. I flipped further, scanning quickly, looking for anything they had not expected me to notice. And then I saw it. A business card tucked into the back pocket of the folder. Clean, white, embossed lettering. I slid it out and read it aloud. "Evan Mercer, Senior Financial Planning Consultant. Mercer and Hale Advisory Group." Daniel's shoulders tensed. Claire's hand moved slightly, as if she might reach for the card, but she stopped herself. I looked up at them, holding the card between my fingers. "So this is who you spoke to?" Daniel exhaled slowly. "Mom, it is not what you think." I stood up again, this time with purpose, and walked to the counter where my phone rested beside the coffee maker. I picked it up, turning it over once in my hand. "Then you should not have any problem with me asking him directly," I said. Behind me, I heard Claire stand as well. "Margaret, I really think you should take some time before you do anything impulsive." I turned back to face them, the phone now steady in my hand. "This is not impulsive," I said. "This is overdue." Daniel stepped forward slightly. "At least let me explain first." I studied his face, searching for the boy who once chose truth over fear. For a second, I thought I saw him. But then Claire placed a hand lightly on his arm, and whatever he was about to say disappeared. That was when I understood something new. This was not just about what they had planned. It was about who had been leading it. I glanced down at the card again, then back at them. "I will call him in the morning," I said. "And when I do, I want to know exactly what version of me you have been describing." Claire's expression hardened just slightly, controlled but unmistakable. And in that moment, I realized the conversation with that advisor was not going to confirm what they told me tonight. It was going to reveal something they had worked very hard to keep from me. The next morning, I did not wait for second thoughts to creep in. By 8:15 a.m., I was already dressed, standing in my kitchen with a fresh cup of coffee growing cold in my hand, staring at the business card again. Evan Mercer. Mercer and Hale Advisory Group. The address was printed in clean black ink. Suite 402, a professional building about 15 miles away, just off the interstate. Close enough that they had not even tried to hide it. I set the coffee down untouched, picked up my keys, and left the house. The drive felt shorter than usual, though I noticed every detail along the way. The same gas station on the corner where Thomas used to fill up every Sunday morning. The strip mall with the dry cleaner that still had his name in their system. Familiar places, steady and unchanged, which only made what I was about to walk in feel sharper by contrast. The building itself was newer than I expected. Glass front, brushed steel letters by the entrance, a row of neatly trimmed shrubs along the sidewalk. I parked, checked the address again, and walked in. The lobby smelled faintly of polished wood and something citrus, like an attempt to make everything feel clean and controlled. A receptionist looked up from behind a curved desk. "Good morning. How can I help you?" she asked, her tone polite but practiced. I stepped forward, placing the business card on the counter. I have a question about a consultation that was done here. My name is Margaret Whitmore. She glanced at the card, then back at me. Do you have an appointment, Ms. Whitmore? No, I said, but I believe my son and his wife met with Mr. Mercer regarding my financial situation. I would like to speak with him directly. There was a brief pause. Not long, but enough. She typed something into her computer, eyes scanning the screen. Let me see if he is available, she said. I stood there, hands folded loosely in front of me, watching the reflection of people moving behind me in the glass wall. A man in a suit passed by, speaking quietly into his phone. Somewhere, a printer hummed. Everything moved like a system already in place. After a minute, she looked up again. Mr. Mercer can see you for a few minutes, she said. 4th floor, 2nd door on the right. Thank you, I replied, picking up the card again. The elevator ride was quiet. When the doors opened, I stepped into a hallway lined with framed certificates and neutral-colored walls. Mercer and Hale Advisory Group was printed again beside. A frosted glass door. I knocked once, then opened it. Evan Mercer stood up from behind his desk as I entered. Mid-40s, neatly dressed, the kind of man who made a living sounding reassuring. Ms. Whitmore, he said, extending his hand. Please have a seat. I understand you had some questions. I sat down, placing the business card on his desk between us. I believe you met with my son, Daniel Whitmore, and his wife, Claire, I said. I would like to know what was discussed. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he folded his hands, resting them on the desk, and gave a small, careful nod. I have to be mindful of client confidentiality, he said. But since this concerns you directly, I can clarify certain general points. General points. I held his gaze. Start there, I said. He reached for a folder on the corner of his desk. Not a blank one, a prepared one. He opened it and turned it slightly so I could see. My name was on the tab. Margaret Whitmore. Inside were printed documents. Notes. A structure plan. Your son expressed concerns about your long-term financial stability and cognitive resilience, he said. The words were clinical, precise. They wanted to explore options that would allow for a smooth transition of decision-making authority, should it become necessary. I leaned forward slightly. And what information did they give you to support that concern? That was when he hesitated, just briefly. But I saw it. He glanced down at the page in front of him, then back at me. They indicated there had been some recent confusion regarding bill payments and documentation, he said. I felt something sharpen inside me. Confusion, I repeated. Can you show me exactly what they told you? He paused again, then turned one of the pages fully toward me. There, in clean-typed notes, was a line that did not belong to my life. Client has missed multiple utility payments and shows signs of financial mismanagement over the past 6 months. I stared at it for a second, then another. Then I reached into my bag, pulled out a folded envelope, and placed it beside his document. Inside were my last 6 months of utility receipts, all stamp paid, each dated on time. I slid them toward him. These are my records, I said calmly. So, I would like you to explain why your file says something entirely different. Evan Mercer looked down at the receipts, then back at his own notes. For the first time since I walked in, his composure shifted, just slightly. Ms. Whitmore, he said, slower now, this information was provided by your son. I sat back in my chair, letting that settle fully into place. Not a misunderstanding, not a precaution, a constructed narrative. And as I looked at that page again, I realized this was not just about taking control of my future. It was about rewriting my present in a way that justified it. And I had only just seen the first line of that story. I did not leave Mercer's office right away. I sat there for another minute, looking at the 2 sets of papers side by side, his file and my receipts, like they belonged to 2 completely different people. So this entire recommendation, I said slowly, tapping his document with my finger, is based on information that is not accurate. Evan Mercer adjusted his posture, more cautious now. It is based on what was presented to me, he replied. If that information is incorrect, then yes, the conclusions would need to be reevaluated. I nodded once. Then I suggest you start reevaluating. I gathered my receipts, folded them neatly, and placed them back into my bag. But before I stood up, I looked at him one more time. Did they sign anything? I asked. Anything that gives them authority over my accounts? He hesitated again, and this time the pause was heavier. There was an initial inquiry submitted, he said carefully. It was a request to explore adding your son as a secondary authorized party, contingent on further documentation. My grip tightened slightly on the edge of my bag. Contingent on what kind of documentation? A physician's statement, typically, he said, something that supports diminished capacity or the need for assistance. I held his gaze, letting that sink in fully. They were not just planning. They were building a case. I stood up then. Thank you for your time, Mr. Mercer, I said. I believe I have everything I need for now. He gave a small nod, though his expression had shifted into something more guarded. If you would like, we can schedule a formal review of your financial structure, he offered. At this point, I replied, I prefer to handle that independently. The hallway felt different on the way out. Not unfamiliar, but clearer. Every framed certificate, every polished surface, it all looked less impressive once I understood how easily a narrative could be built inside it. I stepped into the elevator, pressed the button, and watched the doors close. By the time I reached the parking lot, my phone was already ringing. Daniel's name lit up the screen. I let it ring once, twice. Then I answered. Hi, Mom, he said too quickly. I was just calling to check in. I leaned against my car door, the sun already warming the metal. That is interesting timing, I said. There was a brief pause on the other end. What do you mean? He asked. I just left Mercer and Hale, I said. Silence. Not confusion. Not surprise. Silence that confirmed he already knew exactly where I had been. When he spoke again, his tone had changed. More controlled. You should have talked to me first, he said. We were going to explain everything. You already did, I replied. Just not to me. Another pause. Then, more firmly, Mom, this is getting out of hand. We're trying to help you, and you're turning it into something it is not. I straightened, unlocking my car but not getting in yet. No, I said. What you're trying to do is move faster than I can react. That landed harder than I expected. I could hear it in the way he exhaled. You are overthinking this, he said. We have not done anything yet. I looked out across the parking lot, at the row of cars, the quiet morning continuing as if nothing had shifted. You filed an inquiry to gain access to my finances, I said evenly. You told a professional that I cannot manage my own bills. And you started that process nearly a year ago. My voice did not rise, but it sharpened. That is not nothing. On the other end, I heard a faint rustling, like he had moved the phone away for a second. Then Claire's voice, quieter but close enough that I could hear it clearly, asked her if she found the rest. I did not react out loud, but I felt it. Rest of what? Daniel came back on the line. Mom, he said, slower now, we need to sit down and talk about this properly. Tonight. No. Surprises. I opened the car door and finally slid into the driver's seat, closing it with a soft but final sound. No surprises, irrapata. That would be a change. I ended the call before he could respond. For a moment, I sat there with my hands resting on the steering wheel, thinking about what Claire had just said. The rest. I reached into my bag, pulled out the folded documents again, and flipped through them one more time. That was when I noticed something I had missed before. A second tab in Mercer's folder. Not labeled with my name. Labeled with an address. My address. And whatever was inside that section, they had not expected me to see it yet. I did not start the car right away. Instead, I sat there with the folder open in my lap, the morning light cutting across the pages at an angle that made every typed word feel sharper, more deliberate. The second tab was thinner than the first, but it was organized the same way, clean, structured, intentional. I slid my finger under the divider and turned the page carefully. At the top, in bold, was my address, 214 Maplewood Drive. Beneath it, a heading, Property Transition Scenarios. I read that line twice, slower the second time, letting each word settle. Transition, not maintenance, not support. Transition. There were bullet points underneath. Estimated market value, $485,000. Suggested timeline, 6 to 9 months. Recommended preparatory steps, evaluation, documentation, transfer readiness. I felt something steady rise in me. Not panic, not even anger anymore, but something colder and more precise. They were not just planning to manage my life. They were planning to move it. I turned another page. A printed estimate from a local real estate agency, complete with comparable listings from within a 2-mile radius. I recognized one of the houses immediately. A ranch-style place on Elm Street that had sold just last spring. I remembered because Thomas and I had driven past it together, talking about how much the neighborhood had changed. Now, it was part of a calculation that included me. I reached into my purse again, this time pulling out a small notepad I kept for grocery lists and reminders. I flipped to a blank page and wrote down 3 things. Evan Mercer. Mercer and Hale. Property transition. The act of writing it down made it real in a different way. Not something happening to me. Something I could track. Something I could respond to. My phone buzzed again in the cup holder, but this time I did not pick it up. Instead, I opened my contacts and scrolled to a name I had not called in over a year. Harold Finch. I hesitated for just a second, then pressed call. It rang twice before he answered. Harold Finch speaking. His voice was the same, measured, steady, the kind of voice that did not rush to conclusions. Harold, this is Margaret Whitmore, I said. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. Margaret, he replied, a note of recognition immediately there. Not at all. What can I do for you? I glanced down at the papers again, at the numbers, the timelines, the quiet assumptions built into every line. I need to review my estate documents, I said, and I need to do it today. There was a brief pause, not of hesitation, but of recalibration. That sounds important, he said. Can you come by this afternoon? I will be there, I replied. I ended the call and placed the phone back down, then looked at the folder one more time. They had built a version of my future that moved in one direction only, away from control, away from ownership, away from me. But they had made one mistake. They assumed I would only react once everything was already in motion. I closed the folder, slid it back into my bag, and finally started the car. The engine turned over smoothly, the same way it always had, reliable, predictable. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I checked the rearview mirror out of habit. For a moment, I caught my own reflection. Steady eyes, composed expression, not the picture of someone being pushed aside, but someone who had just seen the full outline of a plan and understood exactly where to press. By the time I reached the end of the block, I was no longer thinking about what they had done. I was thinking about timing, about sequence, about what needed to happen next before tonight's conversation at my dining table. Because if they believed they were walking into that dinner with control, then they had no idea I had already started rewriting the outcome. I arrived at Harold Finch's office 10 minutes early, which was something I had not done in years. His building sat just off Main Street, an older brick structure with a narrow parking lot and a small brass plaque by the entrance that read Finch Legal Services. It was not impressive in the way Mercer and Hale had been, but it was solid, familiar, the kind of place that had been there long before anyone started talking about transition scenarios. Harold met me at the door himself. Margaret, he said, offering a firm handshake. You sounded serious on the phone. I am, I replied. He led me into his office, closing the door behind us. The room smelled faintly of paper and coffee, and the shelves along the wall were lined with binders that looked like they had been opened and used, not just displayed. I placed my bag on the desk and took out the folder along with the notepad where I had written down the key points. I need you to look at this, I said, sliding everything toward him. He adjusted his glasses and began reading slowly, carefully, the way a man does when he knows the details matter more than the summary. I watched his face as he moved from one page to the next. The shift was subtle, but it was there, a tightening around the eyes, a pause at certain lines. When he reached the section labeled Property Transition Scenarios, he leaned back slightly in his chair. Did you authorize any of this? He asked. No, I said. And until yesterday, I did not know it existed. He nodded once, then tapped the page with his pen. This is not just casual planning, he said. This is structured. Someone has been building a case. I folded my hands in my lap. I figured as much. He flipped to another page, then another. And this inquiry about financial oversight, he continued. They have already taken the first step. If they had obtained a physician's statement, They could have moved forward with this without your direct consent. I held his gaze. How close are they? Harold did not answer immediately. Instead, he reached for his keyboard and typed something quickly, pulling up a document on his screen. Let me check something, he said. A few seconds passed. Then he turned the monitor slightly, so I could see. It was a public filing. My name again, Margaret Whitmore. But this time, it was attached to something else. A preliminary notice. Petition for review of financial competency. Filed 3 weeks ago. My eyes moved across the screen, reading each word carefully, making sure I was not misunderstanding it. They already filed this, I said, my voice steady but quieter now. Yes, Harold replied. It has not been approved. It is still under review. But it is active. Active. That word settled differently than the others. It meant movement. It meant time was already ticking on something I had not even known existed. Why was I not notified? I asked. Harold leaned forward slightly. You should have been. But sometimes these initial filings are processed before formal notice is delivered, especially if they are requesting an expedited review. I sat back, letting that information settle fully. They had not just planned. They had acted, and they had done it in a way that gave them a head start. Harold closed the file on his screen and looked at me directly. Margaret, I'm going to be very clear with you, he said. If this proceeds without challenge, they could gain partial control over your financial decisions. Possibly more, depending on how it is argued. I nodded once. Then we challenge it. A small shift passed across his expression, something closer to approval than concern. Good, he said, because that is exactly what we are going to do. He reached for a blank document and began writing. First, we file an objection. Immediately. Then we update your estate documents and establish protections that cannot be overridden by a petition like this. I watched his pen move across the paper. Each line he wrote feeling like a counterweight to what had already been set in motion. How long do we have? I asked. Not long, he said, but enough if we move now. I leaned forward slightly. Then we move now. He nodded, then paused, looking back at the folder I had brought. There is one more thing, he said. If they went this far, they are expecting you to either comply or react emotionally. They are not expecting you to be prepared. I allowed myself a small, controlled smile. Then we should not disappoint them, I said. By the time I left his office, the sun was lower in the sky, the afternoon stretching into early evening. I had copies of new documents in my bag, along with a plan that was no longer vague or reactive. It was structured, intentional, and already in motion. As I got back into my car, my phone buzzed again. A message this time, from Claire. Dinner at 6. Do not be late. I stared at the screen for a moment, then set the phone down beside me. 6 o'clock. My dining room. The same table where they thought they had started something. I started the engine, my reflection steady in the windshield. They believed they had been planning this for years. What they did not know was that I had just stepped into the part of the story they had not written, and tonight they were going to find out exactly how much of it no longer belonged to them. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the sky had already started to dim into that soft, early evening gray that settles over quiet neighborhoods like ours. Maplewood Drive looked the same as it always did. Mailboxes lined up evenly, porch lights flickering on one by one, a neighbor walking his dog past the corner, but the house in front of me no longer felt like just a home. It felt like a position, and tonight it was about to be tested. I stepped inside at exactly 5:42 p.m. The air still carried a faint trace of the lemon cleaner I had used that morning, mixed with something warmer now, the scent of garlic and butter. Claire had arrived early. Of course she had. I set my bag down by the entryway and walked toward the kitchen. She stood at the stove, stirring something in one of my pans like she belonged there. Her hair pulled back neatly, sleeves rolled just enough to look casual but intentional. You are cutting it close, she said without turning around. Her tone was light, but it carried an edge underneath. I glanced at the clock on the microwave. I am 8 minutes early, I replied. She gave a small smile over her shoulder. Daniel likes things to start on time. I stepped further into the kitchen, taking in the details. She had rearranged a few things. The salt and pepper shakers were moved closer to the stove. One of my drawers was slightly open, Utensils shifted from their usual order. Small changes, but deliberate ones. I see you made yourself comfortable, I said. She turned back to the pan, stirring again. We're just trying to make things easier for everyone, she replied. The same phrasing, the same calm delivery. I nodded once, then reached past her to open the cabinet and take out a glass. Easier, I repeated quietly. The front door opened a moment later, and Daniel walked in, loosening his tie as he stepped inside. Hey, he called out, his voice louder than necessary, like he was setting the tone before anything else could. He entered the kitchen, glanced between us, then gave a quick, practiced smile. Smells great in here. Claire handed him a plate. I thought we could keep dinner simple tonight, she said. No need to make things heavier than they already are. Daniel nodded, taking the plate, then looked at me. Mom, we appreciate you sitting down with us again, he said. We all want the same thing here. I leaned against the counter, holding my glass of water, but not drinking it. Do we? I asked. He hesitated just long enough to register, then moved past it. We want you to be secure, he said, and we want to avoid complications later. There was again. Future framing. Controlled language. I watched as Claire set the table, placing each fork and knife with careful precision, like she was setting the stage for something she already knew the outcome of. When we sat down, Daniel did not wait long. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a new folder, thicker than the one from last night. He placed it in front of me, his hand resting on top of it for a moment before sliding it across the table. We took the next step today, he said. My eyes moved from the folder to his face. That was fast, I replied. Claire folded her hands neatly in front of her plate. It was necessary, she said. We spoke with the advisor again this afternoon. I did not react outwardly, but I noted the timing. After my visit, after they knew I had seen part of it, they had not slowed down. They had accelerated. I opened the folder. Inside were updated documents, revised language, and one page, clipped neatly at the front, labeled Urgent Review Request. I read the first line carefully. Petition amendment submitted to expedite evaluation based on increased concern. For asset risk. I looked up slowly. Increased concern, I repeated. Daniel leaned forward slightly. After today, we felt it was important to move quickly, he said, before things get more complicated. I held his gaze, letting the silence stretch just enough. Things are already complicated, I said. Claire tilted her head slightly, studying me. Margaret, she said, her voice softer now, almost sympathetic, this does not have to be difficult. If you cooperate, we can make this transition smooth. You will not have to worry about anything. I placed the papers back down, aligning them carefully on the table. And if I do not cooperate? I asked. Daniel's jaw tightened just slightly. Not anger. Calculation. Then the process continues, he said. With or without your input. That was new. Not implied. Not softened. Said plainly. The room felt quieter after that, like something had finally been stated out loud that had been building underneath everything else. I nodded once, slowly, as if I were considering it. I see, I said. I reached for my glass, took a small sip, then set it back down with the same steady movement I had used all evening. Across from me, Claire relaxed just a fraction, like she believed the conversation was moving in the direction she expected. Daniel leaned back slightly in his chair, his posture easing, as if the hardest part was already behind them. And that was when I knew they had made their second mistake. They thought tonight was about convincing me. They thought the pressure they applied had already shifted the balance. I folded my hands on the table and looked at them both calm, composed, exactly as they needed me to be. All right, I said. Let's talk about how this moves forward. Claire's expression softened into something close to relief. Daniel gave a small nod. They believed they had control. They believed the next part of this conversation belonged to them. Neither of them noticed that I had not asked a single question about signing anything, and neither of them had any idea what I had already put in motion before walking back into this house tonight. I did not reach for the pen right away. Instead, I leaned back slightly in my chair, letting my eyes move across the pages again as if I were considering every line carefully. In reality, I was watching them. Daniel's shoulders had dropped just enough to signal relief. Claire's posture had softened, her hands resting lightly near the edge of the table, her attention fixed on me with quiet expectation. They thought this was the moment where resistance turned into acceptance. That was useful. Walk me through it, I said, sliding the folder a few inches closer, but keeping my hands still. Daniel nodded quickly, almost eager. It is straightforward, he said. We are asking for temporary oversight. No sin permanent. Just until everything is stable. Claire added, it is structured in phases. First, limited access to review accounts. Then, if necessary, assistance with managing assets. She spoke like she was outlining a business proposal, not a plan that would take control of my life. I tilted my head slightly. And this, if necessary part, I said. Who decides when that threshold is reached? Daniel hesitated for a fraction of a second, then answered, it would be based on professional evaluation. I nodded slowly, as if that made sense. Of course, I said. I reached forward then, not for the signature page, but for one of the supporting documents. This section, I continued, tapping lightly on the paper, mentions documentation of concern. That would be what you provided earlier, correct? Claire's eyes flickered briefly, but she recovered quickly. Yes, she said. It is just part of the process. I let my finger rest on the page for a moment longer, then pulled my hand back. I see. The room settled again into that quiet rhythm they were comfortable with. Controlled. Predictable. I picked up my glass, took another small sip, then set it down with care. If I'm going to agree to any of this, I said, I want everything in writing. Clear terms. No assumptions. Daniel nodded immediately. That is exactly what this is, he said, gesturing to the folder. It is all there. I gave a small, thoughtful nod, then reached for my napkin, folding it once, then again. A simple motion, but it gave me a second to think about timing. Not whether I would act, but when. And I want copies, I added. Every version. Every submission. Nothing gets filed or updated without me seeing it first. Claire smiled slightly, the kind of smile that signals agreement without giving anything away. That is reasonable, she said. We can make sure you are included moving forward. Included. I almost repeated the word, but I let it pass. Instead, I leaned forward just enough to close the folder, placing my hand flat on top of it. Good, I said. Then we are aligned on that. Daniel exhaled, a quiet release of tension he probably did not realize he had been holding. So we are good? He asked. I met his eyes directly. We are moving forward, I said. It was not the same answer, but he accepted it anyway. That told me everything I needed to know about how closely he was listening. Claire stood up first, gathering the plates from the table with smooth efficiency. I will take care of these, she said. No need for you to worry about cleanup. I watched her carry the dishes to the sink, turning on the water, moving through my kitchen with the same quiet ownership she had shown earlier. Daniel stayed seated for a moment longer, then pushed his chair back. I knew you would understand, he said, his tone softer now, almost reassuring. I gave a small nod. I understand more than you think, I replied. He smiled, taking that as agreement, then walked toward the living room, loosening his tie again as if the evening had already resolved itself. I remained at the table for a few seconds after they left, my hand still resting on the closed folder. Then, slowly, I opened it again and slid out the top document, the one labeled Urgent Review Request. I folded it carefully and placed it into my own bag, separate from the rest. A copy, a piece of their plan, now in my possession. From the kitchen, I could hear Claire rinsing dishes, the steady sound of water filling the space. Daniel turned on the television in the next room, the low hum of a news anchor drifting in. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary evening. Except nothing about this was ordinary anymore. I stood up, picked up my bag, and walked quietly down the hallway to my bedroom. Once inside, I closed the door and locked it. Not out of fear. Out of control. I placed the document on my dresser, next to the folder Harold had given me earlier that afternoon. 2 plans. Theirs and mine, running side by side. I reached for my phone, scrolled to Harold's number, and paused just long enough to consider the next step. Timing mattered. Now more than anything. Not just what I knew, but when I chose to reveal it. I pressed call. It rang once before he answered. Margaret, he said. I glanced down at the document in front of me, then at the door behind me. "It is moving faster than we expected," I said. "They filed an amendment today." There was a brief silence on the line. Then Harold's voice came back, sharper this time. "Then we do not wait," he said. I allowed myself a small, steady breath. "No, Europea. We do not." I ended the call and looked back at the two sets of documents again. They thought tonight had secured their position. They thought I had stepped into their timeline. What they did not realize was that by agreeing to move forward, I had just given myself exactly what I needed: time, access, and their full confidence. And the moment I chose to use all three was already closer than they imagined. I did not sleep much that night, but not for the reasons they would have expected. There was no pacing, no second-guessing, no restless circling through the same thoughts. Instead, I sat at my desk with both sets of documents laid out in front of me, a yellow legal pad to the side, and a pen moving steadily across the page. Timeline, names, actions. Every piece of their plan mapped out next to the steps Harold and I had already put in motion. By the time the clock read 12:47 a.m., I was no longer reacting to what they had done. I was organizing how it would end. At 7:30 the next morning, I was back in Harold's office. He had cleared his schedule. That alone told me how serious this had become. "We file today," he said as soon as I sat down. "Not tomorrow. Not next week. Today." I nodded, sliding the copied document from my bag onto his desk. "They amended the petition yesterday," I said. "They're trying to accelerate the review." Harold scanned the page quickly, his expression tightening. "Yes," he said, "this changes the timeline, but it also gives us something useful." I leaned forward slightly. "How so?" He tapped the document with his pen. "They have committed to a position in writing. Specific claims. Specific language. That gives us something to challenge directly." He turned his monitor toward me. Again, pulling up a draft he had already started. "Formal objection to petition for financial competency review." My name at the top. Beneath it, a structured response that did not argue emotionally. It dismantled their claims line by line. "We submit this within the hour," he said, "and we attach your financial records, your payment history, and a statement from your primary physician confirming full cognitive capacity." I nodded once. "That covers the legal side," I said, "but tonight is still happening." Harold paused, then leaned back slightly, studying me. "You are planning something," he said. It was not a question. I allowed myself a small, measured smile. "I am planning to let them finish explaining themselves," I replied. "On record." His eyebrows lifted slightly. "Recorded?" I reached into my bag and placed my phone on the desk. "Audio," I said. "Clear, direct statements. What they intended. What they filed. What they told the advisor." Harold considered that for a moment, then gave a slow nod. "That could be very effective," he said, "as long as it is done carefully." "It will be," I replied. He closed the file on his screen and turned fully toward me. "Then we do both," he said. "We secure your position legally today, and tonight you let them reveal exactly how far they have gone." I stood up, gathering the documents back into my bag. "That is the plan," I said. By 10:15 a.m., the objection had been filed. By 11 o'clock, my physician's office had confirmed they would send over a statement before the end of the day. Every piece was moving now, not just theirs. Mine. When I returned home, the house felt quieter than usual. Not empty, but waiting. I walked through each room slowly, noting what had changed and what had not. The dining table was still set from the night before, Claire's arrangement untouched. The folder they had given me remained exactly where I had left it, as if they assumed it no longer needed attention. I picked it up, opened it again, and reviewed each page one more time. Not because I needed to understand it, but because I wanted to remember exactly how confident they had been when they handed it to me. At 3:20 p.m., my phone buzzed with a confirmation email from Harold. "Objection filed. Supporting documents attached. Review pending." I read it once, then again, then set the phone down. The balance had shifted. Not visibly, not to them, but legally, structurally, it had already begun. At 5:52 p.m., I was back in the kitchen, setting the table again. Same plates, same silverware, same vase of carnations, though I replaced the water this time. I moved with deliberate care, aligning each piece exactly as I wanted it. not as Claire had arranged it the night before. As I had. At 5:59, I placed my phone on the sideboard, screen facing down, recording already running. A small red light, barely visible, steady and silent. At exactly 6 p.m., I heard the front door open. Daniel's voice came first. "Mom, we are here." Claire followed, her heels clicking softly against the floor. I did not turn right away. I adjusted one final fork, then stepped back from the table and faced them. They walked in with the same confidence they had carried the night before. The same assumption that this conversation would follow the path they had already designed. Daniel set his briefcase down. Claire glanced at the table, then at me, a faint smile touching her lips. "Everything looks perfect," she said. I returned the smile, calm, measured. "It should," I replied. "This is an important conversation." Daniel nodded, pulling out his chair. "Then let us get started," he said. I took my seat slowly, folding my hands in front of me. For a brief moment, no one spoke. The room held that quiet tension again, but this time it felt different. Not uncertain. Loaded. Ready. I looked at them both, meeting their eyes one at a time. "Before we go any further," I said, my voice steady, clear, "there are a few things I would like you to explain to me directly." Claire's smile held, but it tightened just slightly. Daniel leaned forward, attentive, confident. They were ready to talk. They believed this was still their conversation to control. And as I began to speak, I knew this would be the moment where everything they had built, every claim, every step, every quiet assumption, would have to stand on its own in the open. I did not raise my voice. I did not rush the moment. I simply reached into my bag, took out a single document, and placed it in the center of the table between us. "Let us start with this," I said. Daniel glanced. Down first, then Claire leaned in beside him. It took less than 3 seconds for the color in Daniel's face to change. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice tightening despite his attempt to keep it steady. I rested my hands calmly on either side of the paper. "From the same place you did," I replied, except I asked a few more questions. Claire's eyes moved quickly across the page, scanning the header, the language, the official formatting. "Petition for financial competency review. Filing date, 3 weeks ago. Supporting statement. Client exhibits signs of financial mismanagement." I watched as she reached the line that listed the reporting party. Her fingers paused. "Daniel Whitmore. You told them I could not manage my own finances," I said, not as an accusation, but as a fact. Daniel leaned back slightly, his chair creaking under the shift. "Mom, it is not like that," he said. "We were trying to prepare for—" I lifted a second document and placed it on top of the first. "My utility records. 6 months. Every bill stamped paid. Every date aligned." "Then explain this," I said, "because your version of my life and the actual record do not match." The room changed after that. Not dramatically, not loudly, but the control they had carried into the room began to slip. Claire straightened in her chair, her expression sharpening. "Those are just preliminary concerns," she said. "It is standard to outline potential risks." I turned to her. "Potential risks are not the same as documented failures," I replied, "and you presented them as facts." Daniel's hand moved to the edge of the table, his fingers tapping once before he stopped himself. "We needed the process to move forward," he said. "There was not concern, not misunderstanding. Intention." I let that settle for a moment, then reached for the third document. This one I unfolded more slowly, giving them time to watch. "And this," I said, placing it carefully in front of them, "is the amendment you filed yesterday." Claire's eyes widened just slightly. Daniel did not speak this time. "Urgent review request. Expedited evaluation based on increased concern for asset risk." I leaned forward just enough to close the space between us. "You accelerated the process after I asked questions," I said. "Not before. After." Claire recovered first. She folded her hands together, her tone tightening into something more controlled, less polished. "Because you are resisting something that is necessary," she said. "This is exactly why we had to act." I held her gaze. "You had to act," I repeated. "Or you had to secure control before I understood what you were doing?" Daniel stood up then, pushing his chair back with more force than he intended. This is not about control, he said. This is about protecting what matters. I remained seated. Then why did you not tell me the truth? I asked. He stopped. Just for a second. That was enough. Silence filled the space between us again, but this time it was not neutral. It was heavy, measured. I reached into my bag one final time and took out a small, neatly folded sheet of paper. I placed it on top of everything else. This is the formal objection filed this morning, I said, along with my financial records and a statement from my physician confirming full cognitive capacity. Claire's composure broke first. Not completely, but enough. You filed against us? She asked, her voice sharper now. I protected myself, I replied. Daniel stared at the document, then back at me. You went behind our backs, he said. I allowed myself a small, steady breath. No, I said. I stepped into a process you started without me. The balance had shifted now. Not emotionally, structurally, legally, in a way that could not be undone with words. I reached for my glass, took a slow sip of water, and set it back down. Then I looked at them both, my voice calm, but unmistakably firm. So now we are all working with the same set of facts, I said. Claire's eyes narrowed slightly. Daniel's posture had changed completely. The confidence was gone, replaced with calculation. They were adjusting, reframing, looking for a way to regain control. And that was when I understood something else. This was not the moment they would back down. This was the moment they would push harder. And I had just given them no room left to hide how far they were willing to go. Daniel's hand slammed flat against the table before I even finished my sentence. The sound cracked through the room, sharp and sudden, rattling the silverware just enough to make it clink against the plates. You had no right to do that, he snapped, his voice no longer controlled, no longer measured. This was supposed to be handled as a family. The word family hit harder than anything else he had said. I pushed my chair back and stood up so quickly it scraped loudly across the floor. Family, I shot back, my voice rising before I could stop it. You filed a legal petition against me without telling me. You told a stranger I cannot manage my own life. And you were standing here talking about family. Claire stood up too, but she did not step back. She stepped forward. Because you were not listening, she said, her tone sharper now, stripped of that polished calm she had worn like a shield. We try to ease you into this. We try to do it the right way. I laughed, but it came out rough, uneven. The right way? I repeated. Is that what you call rewriting my records and trying to take control of my house? Daniel ran a hand through his hair, pacing once beside the table like he was trying to regain control of something that was already gone. You are blowing this out of proportion, he said, but his voice was strained now, stretched thin. This is about making sure everything is protected before something happens. I stepped toward him, closing the distance he had just created. Something already happened, I said, my voice shaking now, not with weakness, but with anger I could not hold back anymore. You decided I was no longer capable without even asking me. You made that decision for me. Claire crossed her arms, her posture rigid. Because you're getting older, she said, and this time there was no softness left in her voice at all. Because things change whether you like it or not. That landed differently, not because of what she said, but because of how easily she said it. Like it had been sitting there for a long time, waiting for the moment she no longer needed to hide it. I felt it then, not just anger, something deeper, something that came from years of believing I was still seen, still respected, still part of this family in a way that mattered. So that is it, I said, my voice lower now, but tighter. You decided I'm a problem that needs to be managed? Daniel stopped pacing and turned back to me. You are not a problem, he said quickly, but this situation is. I shook my head, disbelief breaking through. No, I said, the situation is that you lied. You built a case against me, and you expected me to sit here and thank you for it. Claire stepped closer again, her eyes fixed on mine. We expected you to understand, she said. And if you cannot, then we will move forward anyway. That is how this works now. There it was. No more careful phrasing. No more pretending this was about my well-being. Just control, stated plainly. I felt my hands tremble, and I did not try to hide it. You really believe you can do that? I asked, my voice breaking slightly under the weight of everything hitting at once. You really think you can take my life and rearrange it without me? Daniel hesitated again, but this time it was different. Not uncertainty. Conflict. But did not last. We have already started, he said. That was the moment something inside me snapped fully into place. Not calm. Not cold. Clear. Painfully clear. I turned away from them for a second, pressing my hand against the edge of the counter just to steady myself. The room felt too small suddenly, like the walls had moved in without me noticing. But I did not step back. I turned around again, facing them both. Then let me make something very clear to you, I said, my voice shaking but firm. You do not get to decide what happens to me. Not now. Not ever. Claire opened her mouth to respond, but I cut her off. No, I said louder now. You have said enough. The silence that followed was different from before. Not tense. Not waiting. Broken. Daniel looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time that night. Claire's expression hardened into something colder, more distant. Whatever version of this they had planned, it was gone now. And standing there, with the documents still spread across the table between us, I realized something else just as important. They had pushed this too far to walk it back quietly. Whatever happened next was not going to stay inside this house. The silence did not last long. It broke with the sound of a firm knock at the front door. Not hesitant, not polite, deliberate. Daniel turned his head toward the hallway, confusion flashing across his face. Are you expecting someone? He asked. I did not answer him right away. I walked past the table, past the scattered documents, and toward the door with steady steps that felt heavier and more certain than anything I had done all evening. When I opened it, Harold Finch stood there, briefcase in hand, his expression composed but unmistakably focused. Beside him was a uniformed county officer, not aggressive, not forceful, but present in a way that made everything immediately real. Ms. Whitmore, Harold said, stepping inside without hesitation. I believe it is time. Daniel froze where he stood. Claire's posture stiffened instantly. What is this? She demanded, her voice sharp, cutting through the air. I closed the door behind them and turned back toward the room. This, I said, my voice steady now, no longer shaking, no longer uncertain, is the part you did not plan for. Harold set his briefcase down on the table, moving the documents Daniel had brought just enough to make space. He opened it and pulled out a stack of papers, neatly clipped, already prepared. Earlier today, he began, his tone calm, but carrying authority. A formal objection was filed against the petition submitted in Ms. Whitmore's name. That objection includes verified financial records, a physician's statement, and evidence of material misrepresentation in the original filing. Claire stepped forward, her composure cracking completely now. You cannot just— I am not finished, Harold said, not raising his voice, but stopping her just the same. He lifted another document and placed it on top. In addition, a notice has been submitted to the court regarding false statements made in a legal petition, which carries significant legal consequences if proven. Daniel's face had gone pale. Mom, you did not have to do this, he said, his voice lower now, strained in a way I had never heard before. I looked at him, really looked at him, and, for the first time that night, there was no hesitation left in me. You already did this, I replied. The officer stepped slightly forward, not aggressive, but enough to shift the weight of the room. Mr. Whitmore, he said evenly, you will need to come with us to answer some questions regarding the filing. Claire turned sharply toward him. This is ridiculous, she snapped. This is a family matter. The officer did not react. It became a legal matter when false information was submitted in a formal petition, he said. Daniel ran a hand through his hair again, but this time it was not controlled. It was frantic. Claire, he said quietly, what did we put in that statement? She did not answer. That silence was louder than anything else in the room. Harold closed his briefcase slowly, then looked at me. The court will review everything within the next few days, he said. But based on what we have submitted, their petition will not stand. I nodded once. That was enough. Daniel looked at me again, something breaking in his expression now. Mom, I was trying to help, he said, but the words did not hold. Not anymore. I shook my head slowly. No, I said. You were trying to take control of something that was never yours. Claire stepped back then, her confidence gone completely, replaced by something colder, more calculating, but it came too late. The structure they had built had already collapsed under its own weight. The officer gestured toward the door. "Mr. Whitmore," he said again. Daniel hesitated for a second longer, then finally moved. Not because he wanted to, because he no longer had a choice. As the door closed behind them, the house fell into a quiet that felt entirely different from before. Not tense, not uncertain. Clean, final. Harold gathered his papers, giving me a small, respectful nod. "You handled this exactly right," he said. I looked back at the table, at the space where their documents had been, at the place where they had tried to rewrite my life. "No," I said quietly. "I just made sure it ended where it should have." And for the first time since any of this began, the house felt like mine again. Completely. Without question. Without compromise.